Hi, I'm Sherry from Whole Circle Studio, and welcome to our third Around the World Block of the Month destination. This month we're traveling to Peru, and we're making a quilt block that celebrates Machu Picchu. In this video, I'm going to share tips to help you piece your block. First, a little bit about Machu Picchu. It's located 310 miles from the capital of Peru, which is Lima. This archaeological site is nestled high in the slopes of the Andes Mountains. The ruins are linked to the Inca Empire, and the site has about 200 buildings that are considered to be architectural wonders. In addition to this video, please refer to the tips included in the pattern, along with other links below, including the foundation paper piecing video tutorial and previous month's videos. Let's get started. There are a few small sections in this block to piece, but nothing too tricky. If you need some extra tips with the tiny paper piecing, be sure to check out my video tutorial. The link is below this video. I typically spray starch the fabrics I'm using for the non-paper piecing portions of the fabric. I find that the stiffness of the fabric helps me with accuracy as I'm joining up these cut pieces with the paper pieced parts. If you want some extra pointers and tips for using spray starch, be sure to check out a special blog post. The link is below this video. Also, be sure to fill out your fabric chart and pay attention to the shading on the patterns. Most of the windows in the buildings are the background fabric, but there is one that's the mountain fabric. In this block, we're covering sections that have angles. This can be a bit tricky to figure out exactly where the fabric needs to be to cover the section we're working on. Let me show you how I approach this. Here you can see I have the fabric covering section 1 and extending at least a ½ inch to a 3/4 of an inch all around section 1. I'll then go ahead and fold back on the line between section 1 and section 2 since I want to join section 2 next. I'll trim a 1/4 inch of seam allowance from section 1 just to get that out of the way. And now I'll put these two fabrics correct sides together. This is the fabric that I'm using to cover section 2, and I pre-cut it using the measurements in the pattern. First, what I'll do is I'll just put them correct sides together. And then this is the tricky thing for the angle, to make sure that we have it covered. So if I look over, section 2 is right here, and I can see in reverse that it's a little bit tight. Again, you have to kind of use some X-ray vision to this edge. So I'll just slide it down a bit. If I'm having trouble seeing where section 2 is exactly, I can take a pencil and draw it. I could see right here it ends here, so I'll just slide it down a bit to give it some wiggle room. And then I can see that section 2, again we're looking at it in reverse, is completely covered with that new fabric, so I'm good to go. I'll then open it up and sew on that line. So you can use this method to know exactly which way, left to right, to position your fabric before opening it and sewing. Have you ever paper pieced a light fabric after a dark fabric and then noticed ghosting? Meaning a sliver of dark fabric appears about a 1/4 inch from the seam, since you're essentially pressing seams to the light side. If I'm using a fairly light fabric next to a dark fabric, I'll sometimes adjust my seam allowance so I don't get the ghosting. It usually presents itself after you make your quilt sandwich and when your quilting is complete. Let me show you how I do this. Here I have a sample of a pretty dark purple fabric, and then I added on a white piece. So if I went ahead and cut my seam allowance, I might see a little bit of dark here, dark purple fabric here. So to avoid that, what I'll do is, this is how the piece came off my machine. I'll go ahead, fold back the paper like I normally do, and trim my 1/4 inch seam allowance. What I'll then do is flip it over so that the dark side is on the bottom. I'm then going to pull back the lighter fabric, and ever so slightly I'm going to take a little bit of this purple fabric off, essentially a sliver, no more than a 1/16 of an inch, and be very careful doing this both for your fingers but also not taking too much off. And then I'll trim back that purple. You don't want to take too much off, otherwise you risk your seam actually coming undone. Just ever so slightly. And then I'll go ahead, open up the paper, open up the fabric, and I'll press like I normally do. And that way there's no chance of that purple fabric peeking out of the seam allowance. When you're ready to join your Machu Picchu paper pieces together, there's a couple of areas you'll want to pay special attention to so that you get your seams to align. These sections are pieces A and B, aligning the seams for the mountain, piece C and the D through K unit, aligning the bottom seam of the buildings, and then your piece AB to the main unit, aligning the top of the mountain to the bottom. It's helpful to use the positioning pinning technique that I demonstrated in previous block videos. I can't wait to see your Machu Picchu blocks come together. Thanks again for being here and sewing along with us. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Also, be sure to share your progress on Instagram using the Around the World hashtags so we can check out what you're working on. See you next month, and happy sewing!